And welcome to the 2021 CCDEH Training Conference. I'm your conference chair, Dave Conway, Environmental Health Director for Mariposa County. And first off, I want to start off by thanking Hedgerow for sponsoring us. Hedgerow Software is sponsoring the event for us. And a couple of housekeeping items. Make sure you log into the CCDEH website. Go to the virtual training series, as you see on the screen right now. Log into 2021 and go in and sign up for future courses. You're going to want to register and sign up. The next item is you want to make sure that once the course is completed, you do the course evaluation. You will not get credit for the course if you do not do the evaluation. You can always also go back if you missed any previous items, go back to our video library and watch some of last year's great presentations. And these will also be available. If you miss the live version, you'll be able to go back and visit and still get credit for taking the course. And I think that's it. I'm going to turn it over now to Liza Frias to start the first Food Safety Committee's presentation on ghost kitchens and street vendors.
Good morning, everyone, and so sorry that we couldn't be together, but we're really excited this morning to, of course, welcome our presenters and to welcome all of you to our food safety session. So today's session is going to be exploring the challenges faced by the food industry during a pandemic and beyond. We're going to be discussing ghost kitchens, shared kitchens, and street food vending, both permitted and unpermitted. With us today to share about ghost kitchens and shared kitchens is Rachel Janbek, the director of the City of Pasadena, along with Dan Santos, who's the senior manager of Kitchen United. I'm going to give a little bit of background on Dan, since we all know our wonderful Rachel. Dan started his career with passion. As a young boy, he was fortunate enough to have a mother that shared time with him in the kitchen. Years later, Dan got his first job as a line cook in a local restaurant. This is where Dan started to build a framework for his career. His career has taken him from the kitchen to overall restaurant operations and everywhere in between. It's these unique skill sets that have made him a great addition to the operations team with Kitchen United. Dan's career has been challenging, varied, and he would say exciting. All of these are just pebbles on the path of his life. In addition to Dan, we are also joined by Katie McKeon, sorry, Katie. We have Scott Cummings that will be here from UCLA, and Merlin Alvarado. We're really excited to welcome Merlin. She is actually a sidewalk vendor that is, participates in our Hollywood Walk of Fame. And has some challenges that I'm sure she'd like to share with us. A little bit of background on Katie. She is a staff attorney at Public Counsel, where she works with community-based organizations and community coalitions to advance racial and economic justice through community-driven planning and equitable development policies. She has worked with the LA Street Vending Campaign for the past 3 years on a variety of policy and legal issues. And Katie is a graduate of the Stanford University and Stanford Law School. So Katie's going to be sharing with us after we hear from Rachel and Dan. In addition, Scott Cummings is a professor of legal ethics at UCLA School of Law. And I already shared on Merlin. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and turn it over to Rachel to start the discussion on ghost kitchens and shared kitchens.
All right, good morning, everyone.
Is it working?
We're not looking at your presentation screen.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah, and just hit the presentation screen view. Excellent. You got it.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for helping me with the screens while I speak. Good morning, everyone. This morning, I'm going to share a little bit about how we in the city of Pasadena permit our shared kitchen facilities where many of our virtual or ghost restaurants operate, and then also how the permitting approach that we took with restaurants in the city of Pasadena that are offering virtual branded restaurant items. Next slide, please. So what is a shared kitchen? I'm providing a broad definition. A shared kitchen is a licensed commercial kitchen where space can be rented on an hourly, daily, or monthly, and I would say also annually even basis, where businesses can produce food in compliance with regulatory requirements without needing to invest in their own brick and mortar facility. Next slide. So we have our largest shared kitchen facility in Pasadena is Kitchen United. And after me, you will hear from Dan regarding the facility. Kitchen United is managed by Kitchen United, and they host 10 virtual restaurants. Some of the businesses that operate out of Kitchen United are not startups actually, but instead are known and established restaurants that have added a virtual kitchen location to expand their online presence and their reach. Many of the businesses that operate out of Kitchen United offer multiple brands, and I will explain that in a moment. Kitchen United consists of several large open kitchen spaces, and although multiple operators share a large open kitchen space, each operator does have their own designated corner or section of the kitchen with their own cooking equipment, their own sinks, and their own food preparation tables. And for the most part, they don't share their equipment. Food from Kitchen United is primarily taken to go or it's delivered. There's no dining room at Kitchen United like you would see in a traditional brick and mortar restaurant. And there are no front of house employees like servers or bussers. Next, please. Kitchen United food orders are placed online, either on the Kitchen United website or through third-party delivery platforms. Ordering online through the website allows customers to order from multiple restaurants in a single order. For example, in a single order from the Kitchen United website, you can get pizza from Fresh Brothers. You can get a pulled pork sandwich from Lucille's Barbecue Smokehouse. You can get a bucket of fried chicken from Dina's, an authentic pastrami sandwich from Cantor's Deli, and you can get carnitas tacos from Trejo's Tacos, and then you can also get a smashed avocado toast or an organic salad from Greenleaf. So the Kitchen United concept really provides a variety paired with convenience. Next slide, please. So how do we approach permitting and inspections at the Kitchen United facility? Well, first, we require Kitchen United to hold a health permit as the primary permit holder. We inspect Kitchen United, and the focus of their routine inspection is the condition of the physical facility and the shared space. We look at the trash area, the restrooms, lockers, the janitorial closet, any shared equipment that they maintain, for example, their grease interceptor, water heaters, and a large shared walk-in cooler. In addition to the permit that's issued to Kitchen United, each virtual restaurant must also have their own health permit. They are considered secondary permit holders. In Pasadena, we have a permit category called Shared Kitchen Facility, which is less expensive. Our restaurant permit fees range from $800 to $1,800 a year, but the shared kitchen permit is approximately $400 per year. The shared kitchen permit can only be issued in conjunction with the primary health permit. It's not a standalone permit. When we inspect the virtual restaurants, the focus of the inspection is on food handling and the cooking equipment and the refrigeration specific to their operation. But there is some overlap with the facility inspection. For example, If we were to find an infestation or a sewage backup, the permit would be suspended for the primary permit holder, as well as any of the virtual restaurants who are operating under those conditions at the time of the inspection. But I do want to say that's never happened at Kitchen United. It's a well-run facility. Just one moment, Lisa, if you could go back. In my experience, the key to successful permitting and inspection program for a shared space is, one, having a primary permit holder who's closely involved with and supportive of the shared users, and who holds high standards for compliance with CalCode, and who maintains an open line of communication with environmental health. You know, specifically with Kitchen United, they notify us every time an operator leaves the facility, like they're no longer going to be a member, and every time they are considering a new member to join. They maintain the facility clean and the equipment is in good working order. Kitchen United acts as sort of a consultant even for their virtual restaurants, in the sense that they guide them through our permitting process and our plan review process, if that's a necessary step. And they even go above and beyond by tracking their virtual restaurants' health permits and sending them reminders when they need to renew at the time of renewal. Next slide, please. All right, I'm also going to speak on virtual branding. Now, virtual branding is different from a shared kitchen model. I just spoke on shared kitchens, and a lot of the operators at our shared kitchens, they might be referred to as ghost kitchens because there's no dining room or storefront where you can walk in and sit down, or they might be referred to as virtual kitchens. There's another concept called virtual branding that's different from the shared kitchen model, but you will find that many shared kitchen operators offer virtual brands. Virtual branding is a newer concept, to me at least, and that it's one that we just really stumbled upon in Pasadena. So what is virtual branding? Virtual branding, as defined by DoorDash, is a delivery-only concept that allows restaurants to launch an additional restaurant on an online platform using their existing kitchen and staff. Virtual brands help restaurants increase sales and reach new customers without increasing operational costs. Next slide, please. I threw this headline into one of the slides because I really thought it made a, it's a strong point from the Palo Alto Weekly. The headline is, "Your food is here. It's from a restaurant that doesn't exist." Next slide, please. All right, well, I'm going to explain now, what does virtual branding look like at a restaurant here in Pasadena? If you open Postmates, Uber Eats, or DoorDash right now in Pasadena, you'll find restaurants like the restaurant in the middle at the top, Flavortown, which offers cheesesteak egg rolls. You can order that, cheesesteak egg rolls from Flavortown. Then you can scroll through the other restaurants that Postmates advertises on their site, and you might find wings from Wing Squad. You can continue scrolling and you might find another restaurant. The name of the restaurant is Mr. Beast, and you might decide, I'm going to order the Mr. Beast style burger combo. And then you might head over to DoorDash or Uber Eats and find a restaurant called Taiga Bites and order some fried chicken bites. You might go back to Postmates and find a restaurant called Pizza, where they offer this amazing flatbread pizza, and decide you really want to order from that restaurant. And then finally, you might think, I want to order from a company that has great desserts. And you see on Postmates a restaurant or a business called Mariah's Cookies, and you order their cookie combo plate. Now, I want to share something with you. You might be surprised to know that none of these restaurants physically exist. You can't go to Flavortown Kitchen. You can't walk into Wing Squad, and you cannot sit down and eat at Mr. Beast. You might be surprised to learn that food from all 6 of these restaurants is prepared in a restaurant in Pasadena called Buca de Beppo, in the existing Buca de Beppo kitchen by Buca de Beppo cooks. You might also be surprised to learn that each of these virtual brands have their own social media presence. They have their own Instagram pages, and they have their own Yelp reviews, similar to how a restaurant would have Yelp reviews. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, Buca de Beppo is a chain of restaurants that spans multiple states. They were established 28 years ago, and they currently have 81 stores. Pasadena Environmental Health became aware of the Buca de Beppo virtual brands earlier this year, and it was evident from conversations with the organizations that the virtual brands were key in helping the business stay afloat during the pandemic when dining was restricted due to state and local health orders. So how are virtual brands permitted and inspected in Pasadena? Well, with the Buca de Beppo example, all virtual brands are sold by Buca de Beppo. They are the single operator. In that sense, it didn't make sense for us to require a separate health permit for each virtual brand. Instead, we consider the virtual brands at Buca de Beppo to be an expansion of their menu, and each virtual brand operates under the existing Buca de Beppo permit. We conduct routine inspections, and the routine inspection considers the primary restaurant, as well as any virtual brand menu items, to be a single operation. We did consider the following concerns. Space. We were concerned that the existing Buca de Beppo kitchen could not support the menu expansion. Because of those concerns, we required the operator to pay for a site evaluation inspection so we could go and determine if they had adequate space. It also gave us the opportunity to verify that they didn't bring in any new equipment without first submitting plans for approval. We also looked very closely at their refrigeration storage space and dry storage. One thing to consider is that virtual brands tend to have their own branding and their own food packaging, unique with their own style and branded to-go containers, which does increase the facility's overall dry storage space needs. The other concern we had was tracking the facilities. How do we know what restaurants are offering what virtual brands? It seemed so confusing at first. In Pasadena, we became aware of the Buca de Beppo virtual brands because we received a complaint for one of the brands. And at that time, the facility name did not match any of the restaurants in our inventory in Envision Connect. So of course we thought, oh man, we have a restaurant that's operating without a permit, and we sent the inspector out to investigate. But after speaking with the organization, we realized that it was Buca that was offering the food, and they did have a health permit, and we were able to better understand what they were doing. We implemented the following changes to our permitting process. Any restaurant in Pasadena that is interested in expanding their menu to add virtual brands must submit an updated health permit application that includes the name of the virtual operators. We decided that it was not necessary to create a new program record for each virtual brand because there's only one permit and we were only planning on doing one inspection. Instead, all virtual brand names are listed in a searchable field in Envision Connect on the Buca de Beppo program record. For example, when a complaint is received for one of the virtual brands, staff can search the virtual brand name and the permitted facility will pop up in our search results. If we receive a complaint for Mr. Beast, we can search for Mr. Beast in Envision Connect and Buca de Beppo will pop up in the search results. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. And now we'll turn it over to Dan to get the perspective from industry on how shared kitchens work and some of the challenges. Dan, take it away.
Thank you. So I've been in this business now 33 years, and about, I'd say 5-6 years ago, we started noticing in brick and mortars that our on-premise dining was decreasing. This is well before COVID, but due to the nature of the demographic, they felt that going to a restaurant was what they wanted to do. So then we started seeing Uber, DoorDash, Grubhub, Postmates, right? About 3 years ago, Kitchen United started doing what would be a ghost kitchen. So it's a space, like Rachel defined, where we have a larger building with smaller kitchens in it. And across our landscape, we have multiple types of these buildings. In Pasadena and in Chicago, our kitchens they were cooking schools. So they're these large bay kitchens that we had to divide out. And like Rachel alluded to, we don't share equipment. We do have some communal storage, and we've leaned into the health departments in our different municipalities to find out how they want us to approach that, right? We don't want to create an environment where a member moves in, we set them up, they get their first health inspection, and it becomes problematic for us or the member. We don't want that to go out there because we're partnered with these folks. We want them to have good health inspections and be able to show up for themselves in the best way possible. So we've leaned into what the health department requires. For example, in Scottsdale, when I opened our location there, I actually brought in the area supervisor for the region that we're in and walked him through the facility while we were still under construction and talked about some of the challenges that I felt as a previous operator we would be questioned on from our new members, and how we would navigate a health inspection and what that looks like and how that's delineated. And during that process, he very much appreciated that effort, right? He said, you guys could have just opened, never talked to us, and then your members would come in and we could have these landmines that you weren't prepared to deal with. So some of the things that we've done, and you find these across the board in all of our locations now, is we mark all of the shelving, any communal shelving that's in any space, even the ones that are in the members' kitchens, have shelf tags named with the kitchen and their kitchen number. Our walk-ins, our freezers that are communal have diagrams, not only for storage allocation for the broadline distributors, but also for the health department. When they come in, they can look at a diagram and say, we're going to go look at Mr. Beast, for example, and they're this rack, and they see the diagram matches and it's labeled, and then it's very defined, that space. This further addressed issues that we would get from members. Members are coming in, and this is something I deal with all the time because I handle onboarding across the company. Members come in, and the first question they have in regard to health departments and inspections is, how does this work? How many times are we inspected? And then we have to educate them on frequency based on permits type. But then we're very clear with them that we have an overarching inspection, and this is the same across the country. Our inspection will be one type. Our permit will be one type. We're inspected, but while the inspector's in the building, if they're walking back to look at the 3-comp sink, and they walk by your kitchen and you have 100 pounds of raw chicken on a table with no cooling, they may stop and they may walk into your kitchen and ask, what's going on here? What are you doing wrong? How do we avoid this? And intervene, and you very likely could be cited. They don't like that, but it's a reality. So what we found is these members then begin to police themselves, which is really great. And then additionally, we don't police them, but we offer suggestions. And one of the things we've done as a company is really try to hire managers, GMs and AGMs of the facilities that come from the industry in one way or another, that have that experience, so they can speak to operating on a daily basis with some type of expertise. So like myself, I was the GM for the Scottsdale location, and at that time, I had 30 years of experience. So when I would talk to a member and say, hey, we got to make sure that we're storing our stuff properly, and I would give them diagrams and walk them through that process, it carried a lot of weight. And then we built in daily routines. We would walk the facility every day, a couple times a day, and go back to a kitchen and say, hey, I was just in the walk-in and I noticed that your food order that showed up 8 in the morning is still sitting on the floor. Can we go take care of that? We're not telling them what to do. We're just making a suggestion around the fact that it's now violating a health code because it's stored on the floor. We look in their kitchens every day, and if they're not cleaning their equipment to meet the standards of our facility or the standards of food safety and sanitation, we let them know that. We built this into our contracts. We've built this into a facility manual that we give the members, kind of like an employee handbook. And we always refer back to this and say, hey, you're required to keep your equipment clean. And so it's been very interesting navigating this. And the more interesting piece is that every one of the municipalities we operate in, California, Arizona, Texas, Illinois, and now New York, they're all a little bit different. Every overarching permit is different. The individual permits are different. We don't have we only have 2 municipalities that issue shared kitchen permits. The others just offer a health permit based on a traditional E&D environment. But they tailor the inspection and the process after the fact to it being in a shared kitchen. So it's super unique for us. And we have found, and Rachel alluded to this, that the more information we can give the member, the more transparent we are with them, the more transparent we are with the health inspectors, the better off it is for everybody, right? When I was a GM, I would give a tour and a member would come in and they'd ask about equipment and they'd want to set this up and that up. And I understand their perspective because I've worked in restaurants, and many times the way you set up a kitchen for an inspection is not the way you operate after that. And I would be very clear with the member and say, you know what, I get it, but I probably wouldn't do that because our health inspectors are very astute and they pay attention, and they're going to know that from plan review, when you said you were using this equipment, to now your first regular health inspection, the equipment's changed or it's moved or something's different. They're going to read those notes and they're going to call you out on that. And it's going to create an environment that's not good for you. We've had members that have asked if they can install a piece of equipment that violates, either a fire code or a health code. And we push back. We see members that are bringing in home blenders or home food processors, and we let them know, you probably want to get something that's UL rated because you're going to get pushback from the health department. When they come in, they're going to tell you to remove that. So we try to act in the best interest of the member, because ultimately, at the end of the day, what one member does affects another member, which then affects Kitchen United, which is very unique and much different than a traditional brick and mortar. If I have a member that sells a dish, and this really only pertains to our environment, not some of the other ghost kitchens that are out there. But if a member sells food to a guest and the guest is unhappy, all they remember is that they got the food at Kitchen United. So then they post something on Yelp or Google and they give a bad review. What ends up happening is that kind of spreads out. So not only does it affect us, it affects the member that sold the food, but then it affects all the other members. And then many times trickles down to their brick and mortars that are in the area. So we really are diligent in that way to try to help the member understand that they have to be as professional in their processing. They have to make sure that they're making the food look nice, that they're bagging it well. We give them feedback that guests give us. For example, we had a burger brand that was in our kitchen, and when they would bag it, they were putting it in a larger bag that would seal, had very small air vents, but the burgers were hot and steamy. And so then the guests would get the product and it's not very good. So we would give that feedback and let them know, look, we don't care how you package it, but this is the feedback you're getting. You might want to make that change. So it really speaks to what Rachel was saying about trying to be a bit of a consultant and help guide the member, because this environment is so new that it doesn't make sense to a lot of members. I bring them in for tours or I lead them through the onboarding, and their mindset is a brick and mortar, right? I need a kitchen that's 1,800 square feet. I need all of this space. And they have a really hard time wrapping their mind around that they can take an 1,800 square foot kitchen that had dish and expo and large prep areas and shrink that down to 300 square feet of usable space. And that's where we step in as the subject matter expert and let them know, look, you don't need this because you don't have, you don't need a large scullery area because you have a 3-comp sink and we have a dish machine and communal dish areas where you can wash those things. You don't need to have this large area. You don't need an extensive prep area because now you're not producing food for off-premise catering and walk-in guests. That doesn't exist. So you need to look at that segment of your business that's just delivery and off-premise. So it's super unique, and it's changed the way that restaurants are operating. And then on the other side of it, guests, it's very confusing for guests. I mean, there's only a small demographic of folks that really get it. There's folks that, will come into one of our facilities and they don't understand that they can't walk out with the menu. that they can't see one overarching order guide that shows all of the restaurants, that it's all digital, and it creates a small barrier to entry. Additionally, the nature of the way that we deal with the guest ends up being a lot of education the first time they come in. It's very much like if you've ever been to a Brazilian steakhouse and you don't understand how that works. A lot of that first visit is education, understanding how you place the order and how you receive the food. It's very much like that. So our team has to be very up to speed in regard to how does our kiosk work? How do you place an order? What does that mean? How long does it take to get the food out? How do you interact with the kitchen if there's a question or a complaint or just a general comment? And then we put our team in that further place of a professional and the subject matter expert, in that they have to learn all of those brands. So we have Scottsdale's, our largest kitchen center, has 14 kitchens. So, and then we have virtual brands on top of that. So our team there has to not only understand how to educate a guest in regards to how to interact with us, we also have to educate them if they have a question in regards to what is this menu item? What allergens are in this food? How do I navigate modifying my dish? And so again, it creates an environment for us where we're educating a member during onboarding about building a menu that makes ease of ordering as simple as possible. We don't want to create a barrier to entry that's difficult for a guest. We don't want them to walk in and open up a menu to order a hamburger and it makes no sense to the guest and they just walk away, because you only really get one chance. So it's a lot of my job, a lot of our general managers' jobs, a lot of the folks at the corporate level become an educator of sorts, of helping the member understand how to navigate this world, because on-premise dining is going to continue to decline with the way staffing and capacities have changed for dining in during COVID. This is the way that restaurants are going to continue to grow and continue to maintain that revenue stream, because it is a low cost entry. Like Rachel said, many times we don't ask the member to bring their own equipment unless it's specialized. If we have equipment that we can let them use, we do. They have to bring food. They have to bring, their team. They have to do very small things to get in and start operating. So it creates that opportunity for them to grow and continue to offer jobs to people and continue to get their food out there and keep a customer base that will maintain their business. So it's an ever-changing landscape for us. We try to stay up with all of the new policies and procedures that are coming out at the city, county, state, and federal level, and across multiple municipalities. So you can imagine, as much as you all are learning all the stuff and changing the rules on your side to accommodate changes, we're trying to learn them as quickly as they get changed across the country. So it's certainly fun. It's challenging at times, but we have found that it's super rewarding when we get a restaurant that comes in and they do very well and they're able to offer jobs to folks and they're able to continue to grow their business. So we're excited at the future of this and where it'll continue to take us and where it'll continue to take restaurants. But we'll see. Hopefully the municipalities that we deal within are going to be as forward thinking as you all are in California and look at ways to continue to meet the demand and meet the changes, rather than just saying, no, you know what, we don't do that and you're not going to be able to operate, because there are some that operate in that fashion. So I will tell you, as someone from, that works with Kitchen United and does this every day, I appreciate the open nature that I've experienced with the folks in California in regard to the new aspect of food service and the challenges. That's all I got.
Thank you, Dan. We'll go ahead and turn it over to Tim for question and answers.
All righty. We are back with some questions. We have the first question is it easy for a customer to verify the health permit status of a virtually branded food item, or is contacting the local environmental health authority the primary means for a member of the general public to do so? That's for Rachel or Dan.
I can try to answer it, and please, Dan, add to my answer. I think that for the most part, the third-party delivery platforms do list the address of the virtual branded restaurant. What I've noticed on Postmates is if you go to order from Flavortown, it says 80 West Green, which is Buca de Beppo's address. So if you could trace it back to Buca in that way, but it's not obvious, and I don't think most people would realize. But you are correct in the sense that a customer cannot walk in to the restaurant, and if they're ordering on the Postmates platform, they wouldn't have an opportunity to see the health inspection placard that's posted on the window for that facility, because they wouldn't have the opportunity to go to the facility and order that food.
That's pretty much in alignment with what we see. You know, it's not a marketing thing, but it doesn't make sense for us on our front window, since we do have the guest facing area, to post 30 placards for all of the restaurants. But in our other municipalities that offer online searches for health permits, if you went on and searched, say in Scottsdale, this is a great example. We have a Hawaiian concept that offers four brands, 3 that are virtual. If someone searches, say, Wing Wing Hello, which is a virtual brand, they're not going to find that. But if they put in the address, it does come back to the address of the building, and it does list Island Loco, which is the lead brand. And you can really see all of the health permits and the ratings of all of the restaurants that fall underneath that that address. So it is a bit of a challenge, because in our other municipalities, we don't have the virtual brands are not being individually inspected, because that's difficult, because they're being run by one brand, and it's all of that. All of the storage is the same. Many times they're not adding many additional ingredients, and many times those fall under their existing permit. It's not a change of permit. So it would be a bit of a struggle, but you could get an idea. So yeah, it's not much different elsewhere.
Okay, thanks. Question from Brian. He has a couple questions. This first one is, in these shared ghost kitchen operations that have an open layout, with each business being able to have access to everyone else's, what measures are in place to ensure food security between operators and restricting access to one business's food equipment when they are not on site?
So I can tell you that, and we have multiple different types of facilities, but in all of our facilities, we have cameras. Every member is afforded the opportunity to have access to the camera that sees their kitchen. We initially, in the onset of starting the company in Pasadena and Chicago, offered cages for communal storage. And you would think, if you're offering that additional security measure, that the member would appreciate that and throw a lock and make sure that they maintain that. But I will tell you, in Pasadena and in Chicago, we had members that very often would just leave the doors open, would lock the lock into the cage itself, so it was just hanging there. And then additionally, they would come to us and say, hey, can you take these off? Because you would think after 50 years of having Metro racks and cages, that food distributors would create boxes that fit within that landscape, and they don't. So boxes stick out, or they're too tall, or they're too wide, and so it doesn't work for them. Now, saying that, we do have municipalities that require cages for communal, and they must be locked, and it is a violation of a health code if it's not. So New York and Miami, they require cages. So we have to provide that, and we have to let the member know that when they're not accessing their storage, it has to be locked. Across the company, I will tell you, in the 2.5 years that I've been with the company, I have not heard of an instance where there's been someone going into someone else's kitchen, where there's been theft, where there's been any type of malicious intent against another member. Occasionally, an employee will be in a rush, and there's 2 shelves sitting right next to each other, and they grab something off the wrong shelf, and halfway to the kitchen, they realize they grabbed the wrong thing. They turn, they put it back. But we've not experienced something that would create an environment where a member would say, you know what, this is not worth it for us, and we're concerned.
Great, very practical answers there. Are you still, Rachel, are you still rating these sites even though there's no public facing area?
Yes, for the model that's similar to the Kitchen United model, where there's a primary permit holder, and then with Kitchen United, it's 10 virtual or ghost operators. That's 11 inspections that are graded, and that's 11 placards.
Oh, wow.
With the virtual branding model, like the Buco de Beppo example that I provided, it's one inspection because it's a single operator. We consider them to have just expanded their menu, and so it's one placard.
Okay, but where you have kind of related, where you have multiple different operators in the same venue, how do you inspect each individual's operation? Not just the facility, but their actual food preparation and handling? Sure.
So we'll do the inspection of the virtual restaurant when they're operating. They all have different hours. They have a designated space where they have their own food equipment, their own hood, most of them, and their own food prep tables and small reach-in coolers. And so we focus our inspection in that space. Like Dan said, sometimes it's just 300 square feet and 2 employees. And then we'll go and we'll look in the communal storage area, and we'll ask them to show us which storage shelves are theirs. So we'll look at their food storage to make sure that it's safe. And we're focusing on food temperatures and food handling violations. But like I said, if let's say the facility loses hot water facility-wide, and we happen to be there doing an inspection for the facility, we also will note that violation and suspend the permits for the operators that are operating without hot water. So there is some overlap.
Okay, do they typically have walk-in refrigerators in these type of facilities? Are they large enough, or do you find multiple refrigerator units that you have to inspect, or is it all?
Do you want to take that one, Dan?
Yeah, so I wish that I could tell you that we build every facility exactly the same. Unfortunately, in 1, 2, 3, in 3 of our locations, it was we acquired a space that was already kind of built out, and it kind of suited our needs. So we flexed to that. The idea is to provide a kitchen with its own individual walk-in, and then provide communal frozen space. That is the North Star that we operate towards. In 3 of our locations, we have actually 1, 2, 3, 4 of our locations, we have communal refrigeration. It's designated, like I said before, with racks that have shelf tags. And then the members will fill in as they can if they need an additional reach-in or cooler, a reach-in or freezer. The funny part is they come from a brick and mortar where they believe that they need an abundance of space. And we have Kahala Brands, who owns Baja Fresh and the Counter Burger in Scottsdale. And when I showed them storage, we showed them this very large walk-in and freezer that fit 4 6-foot long Metro shelves. And they said, "Oh, this is ours." And I said, "Well, yeah, that one rack is yours, and 1 24 by 36 Metro in the freezer is yours." And they said, "There's no way we'll operate that way." They've been operating that way for over a year now. We have Grimaldi's Pizzeria that has, similar storage space, and they make it work. They just modify their purchasing, which is great at the end of the day, because then it limits their storage on shelf, and it increases their turns of inventory, which is perfect, because then you don't run into the incidents where the food is expiring on the shelf. But we try to give the member the very best scenario to store. Sometimes they do have to change the way they operate a little bit.
That's great. Did you want to add anything, Rachel?
Yeah, specifically at Kitchen United, they have a very large walk-in at the back of the facility, and it's been designated as a communal refrigeration unit, but it's primarily for receiving food deliveries. So the food that's stored in that walk-in is unopened from the distributor. And then as the operators take food from that refrigerator and they open it, it doesn't go back into that large communal refrigerator. Again, it goes into their smaller refrigeration units that are in their space.
Okay.
And that's typical across the landscape. When we onboard them, we actually lead them down that path. This communal space is where you would receive your product, and your as used product is going to be stored in your kitchen because it makes it easier for you. And that's typically the way it operates. We're not seeing prepped food items sitting in the communal space.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Last question is a person in charge of the shared kitchen required to be present during operating hours, or is this only applicable for the tenant operators of a shared kitchen?
So are you asking if the person in charge that represents Kitchen United is there at all times?
Yeah.
So we have a pretty rich staffing model at each kitchen facility. So there's generally a GM, an AGM, a couple of team leads, and then team members. From the team lead up, that's what we would consider on-site leadership. Those folks, there's always one of those people on schedule between open and close. 5 days a week, it's a GM. 5 days a week, it's an AGM. 5 days a week, it's a team lead. And so generally, we try to have the general manager there during the times of day when you're going to incur the most dealings with outside vendors, guest questions, those kinds of things. And then the AGM fills in, but there's always a leadership person. And we do require those leadership roles to carry the municipality's requirement for food manager certification. So if the municipality requires ANSI certification, those team members have it. They may not utilize it, but at least they're in the know and they can kind of hold the rest of the folks in the facility to task because they get it. It's not like they're working in the dark. So we always have someone. And then to further that, we do very much urge the kitchen to have a supervisor on shift every shift, right? We don't want just some cooks in the kitchen that have no idea, because if a health inspector comes in, they're going to ask questions well beyond when did you make this, right? What do you do if someone's sick? All of those other questions that a supervisor level person needs to know. And with the changes that are coming in October requiring someone to have their requirement, their management requirement on every shift, that certainly changed things across the board as well, because now it's not just us saying it as a suggestion, the member is kind of being required to do that.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you guys, Dan and Rachel, for your presentations and answering the questions. Lisa, I'm going to turn it back to you to introduce Katie and her team.
So now we have our next session. So thank you, Dan. Thank you, Rachel. And this is unfinished business. Hopefully you all received some, read ahead information in preparation for this next session. We are really fortunate to have both Katie, Scott, and Merlin to share a little bit more on, sidewalk vending and some of the challenges that they'd like us to consider with respect to mobile food facilities and food vending. So with that, Katie, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for welcoming us to your conference for this session. As Director Frias already mentioned, my name is Katie McKeon, and I'm a staff attorney with the Community Development Project at Public Counsel, a public interest firm operating in LA County. We are part of the LA Street Vendor Campaign, which aims to support and empower thousands of sidewalk vendors operating in LA County and throughout the state. I'm joined by my colleagues today, Professor Scott Cummings of the UCLA School of Law, and Merlin Alvarado, a longtime street food vendor in the city of Los Angeles. Before starting, we want to make sure everybody is connected to the interpretation today. Our presentation is in English and Spanish, so if you do not speak both languages, you will need interpretation. The Zoom host is going to start the interpretation now. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Okay, so you should see you should see a globe on the ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom window. It's located on that same ribbon where you find your chat and mute button. Click on it, then select your preferred language to hear in. If you'd like, you can also mute original audio. If you don't mute the audio, you'll hear the other language being spoken in a lower volume as you hear your preferred language at the regular volume. So thank you so much for helping our presentation run smoothly. I'll just wait 1 minute while folks do that. Yes. Carla, can everybody hear the interpretation? I can hear you, Carla. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to leave this up for one more second before we get started. Great. Okay. So moving on. So we will be doing a short presentation on a recent report co-published by Public Counsel and the UCLA School of Law titled Unfinished Business, which explores some of the regulatory barriers faced by a sidewalk-based mobile food facility when attempting to comply with current law. For this discussion, we're going to focus on the barriers identified in and potential amendments to the Retail Food Code. Given the short session we have today, and to maximize discussion time at the end, I hope that you had a moment to review the various handouts that was sent by Director Frias earlier this week. I will also drop them in the chat during the discussion period, which describe the history of the LA Street Vendor Campaign, the long history of criminalization of sidewalk vendors, and the recent changes to state and local law that have brought us to this point of discussing changes to the Retail Food Code. Given your collective expertise on the law, the food science that backs it, and your role in enforcing this law, we would like to say that we are very grateful for this opportunity to start this dialogue. We hope this is just the start of a fruitful conversation about how to support safe and inclusive food practices on our sidewalks. And we look forward to starting that conversation after we conclude. Here are the goals of this session today: to understand the difficulties that sidewalk food vendors face in the health permitting process, identify the sections of the Retail Food Code that create or reinforce these barriers, and discuss potential amendments to the Retail Food Code to increase participation in the health permitting process. Ultimately, we want to answer the question, how do we support the public health goals of environmental health directors while supporting micro-food businesses? In 1 minute, I'm going to be turning the mic over to Merlin, who will share her experience as a sidewalk food vendor navigating the health permitting process. And then I'll invite Professor Cummings to speak about our report and the legal source of the challenges described by Merlin. Finally, I will return to discuss potential amendments to the Retail Food Code before we open it up to discussion. But before I turn it over to Merlin, I wanted to provide some context about what food businesses we are talking about. Sidewalk vendor is not a term that is used at all in the Retail Food Code, but it is a defined term in the state government code. You can see it on the slide here. Under the Retail Food Code, sidewalk food vendors are generally classified as mobile food facilities, a broad category that includes food trucks, catering operations, etc. This report and the proposed recommendations focus on welcoming these smallest operations, those that operate on the sidewalk, not on the roadway or the street, but focuses on welcoming them into the health permitting process. Again, we're not talking about a pop-up restaurant, such as a satellite food operation, or an unpermitted farmer's market or night market, but individual food carts, typically operated by 1 to 2 vendors and selling anything from whole produce to sliced fruit to hot dogs on the sidewalk. And now I'm honored to introduce Merlin Alvarado to discuss her experience navigating the health permitting process as a sidewalk food vendor. Merlin.
Gracias, buenos días. Buenos días, mi nombre es Merlin Alvarado. Soy una vendedora ambulante en el área de Hollywood. Como muchos vendedores, yo celebré cuando la ciudad de Los Ángeles legalizó la venta ambulante. Pero como vendedora de comida, el camino a una legalización ha sido difícil. Muchos de nosotros, vendedores de comida, hemos vivido el trauma de que llegue el Departamento de Salud con la policía para tirar nuestra comida. No soy un criminal, yo quiero a mi comunidad, a mis clientes, a los ancianos, a los niños que comen mi comida todos los días. Mi comida no hace ningún daño. Pero cuando llegan y me tiran mi comida, me hacen sentir como una criminal. ¿Cuál es el crimen? ¿Ofrecer mi comida a la gente pobre a un precio razonable? ¿Qué solucionan con tirar mi comida? Y el Departamento de Salud dice, tienen que sacar sus permisos, pero lo que no dicen que para una vendedora de comida es casi imposible sacar los permisos de salud. Muchos de nosotros vendedores de comida ya sacamos la licencia de negocio, ya estamos pagando nuestros impuestos, estamos dispuestos a formalizar nuestros negocios. Yo soy vendedora de fruta y también vendedora de hot dogs. Yo tengo un carro de fruta con permiso. Yo entiendo el esfuerzo que se requiere para aprobar los planos de un carrito de acuerdo a todas las leyes, pero no es imposible. Para la venta de hot dog, los famosos hot dog con tocino de Los Ángeles, estaría muy sorprendida si nadie en esta llamada ha aprobado esos hot dogs. Y quiero que sepan que esos hot dogs son ilegales. No existe un carrito para la acera de hot dogs, asados, ni tacos, ni pupusas. Yo he intentado buscar un carrito, sacar mis permisos, como lo hice con mi carrito de fruta, pero el carrito legal para venta de hot dog asados en la acera no existe. Los únicos que hay valen $30,000 y no caben en una acera. No son para la venta ambulante. Entonces, ¿cuáles son mis opciones? El Departamento de Salud dice, busquen carritos con permiso, pero no existen. Entonces, ¿me están diciendo que tengo que parar de trabajar? Le están diciendo a 10,000 vendedores de comida en Los Ángeles que tienen que dejar de trabajar. Mi sueño es poder tener mi permiso para mi venta de hot dog. Estoy muy orgullosa de cocinar una comida que es reconocida como especialidad de Los Ángeles. Pero quiero poder hacer mi trabajo sin miedo a ser arrestada, sin miedo de ver el fruto de mi labor tirado en basureros. Quiero tener una oportunidad real de cocinar de acuerdo a la ley, de apoyar los reglamentos de salud y les pido a ustedes su apoyo. Gracias.
Thank you, Merlin, and thanks to all of you for letting us share our important work with you today. As you all just heard, there are a number of challenges for sidewalk food vendors because of the way that California regulates mobile food facilities, and I want to talk briefly about some of them now. As Katie said at the outset, my name is Scott Cummings, and I'm a professor at UCLA Law School, where I teach the Community Economic Development Clinic. My research and teaching focus on understanding how state and local law can promote the development of healthy, economically vibrant communities. And through my clinic, I began working with the LA Street Vendor Campaign in support of their efforts to remove legal barriers to sidewalk vending. And last spring, after hearing from vendors like Merlin, we decided to investigate why so many sidewalk food vendors, despite having the legal right to be entrepreneurs in Los Angeles, are nonetheless unable to obtain the necessary health permits to do so. With the support of the campaign, public counsel, and the vendors themselves, we produced the report Katie mentioned called Unfinished Business, How Food Regulations Starve Sidewalk Vendors of Opportunity and What Can Be Done to Finish the Legalization of Street Food. To write this report, our team conducted a comprehensive analysis of state and local health regulations pertaining to sidewalk food vending and collected data directly from vendors about their experience with permitting. This allowed us to map every legal step vendors have to take to gain a health permit and to really understand what causes them to fail to complete the process. And there are two key takeaways that I wanted to share with you today. The first is that although sidewalk food vendors really want to enter the formal economy and deeply care about protecting the health of their customers and the broader community, inaccessible and expensive permitting procedures and incompatible equipment and food preparation standards combine to make it virtually impossible for most to do so. Taken together, these barriers operate to make sidewalk food vending functionally illegal and undermine the legitimate public health goals that the rules aim to serve. The second key takeaway from the report is that the reason for these barriers is that the law was not written with small-scale sidewalk vendors in mind, and therefore is ill-adapted to their activities. And specifically, we found that despite aiming to advance legitimate public health principles, the system of food regulation we have now is mismatched to the work of sidewalk vendors in ways that erect insurmountable costs without achieving significant health and safety benefits. And although the system is implemented at the local level, as all of you know, we found that the key barriers ultimately derive from the requirements in California state law, specifically the California Retail Food Code, which regulates food sales, most food sales throughout the state. The code was designed for larger mobile food facilities like food trucks and includes equipment requirements, approval processes, and operational mandates that are onerous and so onerous that they constitute an effective ban on sidewalk food vending. As all of you know, because state law controls local law, barriers at the retail food code level make it virtually impossible for local governments to adapt permitting rules to promote safe, healthy sidewalk food vending. Accordingly, as Katie will discuss in a bit, truly legalizing sidewalk food vending requires fixing specific provisions in the state law. What are the state law provisions that impose the most significant challenges to sidewalk food vendors? By drilling down into the retail food code, which we did over the last several months, we identified 4 key provisions where changes could really make a substantial contribution to facilitating safe, legal vending. So I want to talk about them now. First, the current sink requirements for many mobile food facilities, which require a warewashing sink with 3 compartments for equipment and a separate hand washing sink, make it virtually impossible to build a cart that's compact and light enough to be operated by a single individual and fit on a public sidewalk. While sink requirements make sense for large vehicles with substantial food preparation facilities, they are not functional for sidewalk food vendors for whom there are more feasible design alternatives that still protect public health. And our research revealed that places like New York City and Portland do not have such burdensome sink requirements. The second barrier stems from the way that the state code defines limited food preparation, which is a type of food preparation authorized to be done on an unenclosed mobile food facility, like a food cart. So right now, the way that limited food preparation is defined in the code arbitrarily excludes many activities that typically occur on a food vending cart. So for example, while the law permits holding hot dogs, it prohibits the same for taco meat. This has the effect of prohibiting some of the most popular street foods like tacos, as well as sliced fruit, because they cannot be prepared or hot held on site under this definition. The third barrier in the retail food code is that it requires most vendors who want to get permitted to cook food and clean and store their carts in a commissary, defined as a separate facility that supports mobile food vending. And these requirements have also proven to be a large barrier to low-income vendors due to lack of commissary space in local communities, inaccessibility of these commissaries due to the difficulty of traveling to them daily, and the high cost of a monthly lease to secure one of these limited spots. The fourth barrier that we identified in state law was the plan check blueprint requirement itself. The retail food code requires an individual applicant, as all of you know, to provide technical blueprints of their proposed mobile food facility before it can be manufactured. And this requires a level of technical expertise that is financially out of reach for most vendors, requiring them to rely on manufacturers to pay upfront for blueprints, which may or may not be approved, and a manufacturer cart with no guarantee that the blueprints will ultimately pass the plan check. So what does all this mean for sidewalk food vendors? Overall, we found that in order to comply with these state law requirements, a sidewalk vendor selling prepared food would have to design a cart like the one pictured here, with the multiple sink compartments, cook-to-order equipment, and additional features for water storage and heating, which would weigh well over 1,000 pounds and cost more than an average vendor could expect to make in a year. As you can see, on top of the cost barriers, this cart is significantly bigger than what could realistically fit on a typical sidewalk, and really puts compliance out of reach for most vendors. So with that, thank you. I will turn it back over to Katie to talk about some of our specific recommendations for changes to the California Retail Food Code that respond to these barriers, and after her discussion would be pleased to welcome any feedback or questions. So thank you. Katie?
Thank you, Professor Cummings. So before I dive into the specific recommendations, I would like to just review the high-level goals that guided us as we formulated these recommendations, and that will guide our advocacy moving forward. First, we want to support public health by enabling sidewalk food vendors to more easily enter the health permitting process. This can be done by creating a more accessible system, starting with carts that are right-sized for their sidewalk-based operations. Second, we want to promote a safe environment for all community members. This includes safety for consumers, ensuring that they are eating safely made products, safety for pedestrians, ensuring that they can pass safely on sidewalks and aren't exposed to unsafe equipment, and safety for vendors themselves, who need right-sized equipment that they can move safely on sidewalks. Third, we want to drive down entry costs. The majority of sidewalk vendors are subsistence wage earners, and sidewalk vending is an economic lifeline for people who have been shut out of other opportunities. They typically cannot afford a more expensive food truck or even a trailer that must be hitched to a personal vehicle. We want to support these micro entrepreneurs as they formalize and grow their businesses safely. So for the remainder of the presentation, I will discuss the possible amendments to sections of the Retail Food Code that were just identified by the professor. So as Professor Cummings stated, the 2-sink 4-compartment requirement is a huge barrier for most sidewalk-based mobile food facilities. We propose that the code be amended to reduce the required number of sink and/or sink compartments. This would bring the code more in line with other jurisdictions like New York City, which allows for a single compartment warewashing sink, or Portland, which completely eliminates the need for sinks to be an integral part of the cart for most food items if the vendor has adequate access to sinks at a commissary. The 2020 ANSI recommendations for mobile food carts also only recommend 2 sink compartments as part of the unit. Further, while the code currently allows the use of an auxiliary sink unit in lieu of the sink compartments being an integral part of the primary unit, this provision has not been effectively utilized to support smaller sidewalk carts. Small changes to the code could encourage the safe and communal use of auxiliary sink units by small carts operating in proximity to each other, especially in city centers and/or high-density vending areas. To address limited warewashing needs of the operator, operators could be required to have enough utensils to be swapped out every 4 hours for the duration of the workday, expanding Retail Food Code Section 1143.13b, which already allows this in limited circumstances, or a cart could have a dipper well, which can clean and disinfect used utensils. The second set of recommendations we have revolves around amending the definition of limited food preparation. We propose expanding the list of foods that are allowed to be hot held and reheated on site, especially foods that are processed and served in the same manner as the 3 food items that are already listed in the definition. And we propose further amending the Retail Food Code to allow local health departments to add items to the list at their discretion based on current public health principles. There's already precedent for this in the cottage food system, where the State Department of Health can add or remove items from the list of approved cottage foods. Finally, we propose lifting the categorical ban on slicing produce on site, allowing it to be done in conjunction with appropriate safety measures. Further, changes are needed to the commissary requirements. Frankly, much of the work to create more and more accessible commissaries needs to take place at the local level to ensure that land use laws allow the creation and siting of more commissaries, and that alternative commissary sites, such as churches, restaurants, or community centers, can be permitted as those alternative commissary spaces without running afoul of local land use law. However, there are also some changes to the code that can provide some of the needed flexibility to food vendors to realistically access kitchen and commissary space. We have 3 proposals. 1, encourage the permitting of non-traditional commercial commissary space in local communities, including restaurants, churches, community centers, and schools. 2, amend the cottage food operations and the MECO programs, allowing vendors to take foods prepared under these regulatory frameworks out of their approved home kitchen space to sell from a sidewalk vending cart, without needing an additional commercial commissary lease for that approved cart. And finally, 3, allow certain mobile food facilities, such as those that sell whole produce and prepackaged non-hazardous food, to be stored at home to alleviate demand for commissary space. Next, we propose changes to the cart approval process in order to streamline that process and to catalyze local manufacturing of legal mobile food facilities. The code should be amended to allow local departments to work with manufacturers to pre-approve a variety of cart blueprints, along with the various standard operating procedures that work with each cart, which then can be purchased by a vendor with a guarantee that the cart complies with the code. These changes can result in a single trip to a health department office for inspection of the cart, reducing both staff time and reducing the burden on a vendor, which can also then result in lower permit prices. This can also encourage more manufacturers to produce more carts at an affordable price point for individual vendors, especially if these mobile food facilities permitted in one jurisdiction are recognized as approved in other jurisdictions. Moreover, local departments should be granted some flexibility to approve carts based on current health principles and research, especially as new technology can be applied to achieve similar safety levels. Finally, violations of the Retail Food Code are punishable by criminal misdemeanors, often issued by armed law enforcement agents. Given the decades of exclusion that sidewalk-based food vendors have faced, we propose eliminating the misdemeanor penalties and bringing the law in line with other sidewalk vending regulatory schemes at the state level, such as SB 946, the Safe Sidewalk Vending Act. Again, I have to emphasize that we're talking about an entire sector of the food economy that has been operating informally for decades. In order to successfully transition these businesses into the formal economy and into the health regulatory system, research demonstrates that attempts to formalize are often defeated by overly burdensome regulations and criminalization instead of the needed outreach. If the goal is to bring more sidewalk-based mobile food facility operators into the formal system to improve public health and protect consumers, criminalization works at cross purposes to that goal. In order to bring a largely immigrant, low-income population into the formal health system, educational resources and technical assistance in relevant languages will be much more effective. So, as you heard a little bit today, and as you'll read in our report if you haven't looked at it yet, there are many obstacles that a sidewalk food vendor faces in fully legalizing their business. But as Merlin shared, and as we know from working with food vendors over the past decade, many vendors are eager to find a pathway to obtaining their health permit, have already gotten their food manager certification and other licenses required under law. And they're interested in operating under reasonable food safety standards. But we need your help as the experts in this field to solve this complex problem in a responsible manner. So we look forward to our continued collaboration. Thank you again for inviting us to share this short presentation with you, and we would like to open the floor for questions and any discussion. Please also feel free to contact me or Professor Cummings for any follow-up. Our emails are listed on the slide here. So thank you.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Professor Cummings.
Questions. So I can start off for Katie regarding recommendations. Who would be responsible for the communal sinks?
Yes, so that is a great question. I think that there can be multiple answers depending on the specific community. So the coalition that I work with, the LA Street Vendor Campaign, has already been in conversations with LA County and various board offices who are interested in setting up communal sinks that are either serviced by the county themselves or serviced by a local nonprofit organization that can ensure that the sinks are adequately sanitized, that they're maintained, And so it can be a nonprofit, it could be the county or the city themselves. So there are different possibilities, but there does need to be somebody, an organization or an individual operator who is in charge of this thing. So we recognize that.
Okay, thank you. A couple more questions. For storing the equipment at home, who will verify that the appropriate safety measures are in place? Why would these sidewalk vendors be allowed to store their equipment at home when other mobile operators cannot? So kind of the equity issue.
Right. So yes, so both very good questions. As to the first, that is something that the local health departments would have to kind of figure out what makes sense for their department, whether that is an inspector who, if we're talking about a vendor using the cottage food or the MECO program, and I understand that many of the counties do not have a MECO program set up at the moment, but if it's under cottage food and there's a inspection of the kitchen, there could also be, there could also be a inspection of the proposed site where the mobile food facility would reside when not being used, or would be where it would be stored. And then as to the second question, we're talking about storing the most basic of carts at home. So carts that would not have sinks, would really just be stands for whole produce or prepackaged food that would not come into contact with the mobile food facility itself. So that's one response. But I will also say, you know, we're talking about storage and we're not necessarily talking about sanitation or cleaning operations. So we looked at the definition of what a commissary is. There are maybe 4 or 5 major tasks that a commissary is supposed to accommodate for a mobile food facility. Storage is one, sanitation is a different one. And so we could be talking about allowing a individual mobile food facility operator to store their cart at home, but still requiring that they bring in the cart before their workday begins to sanitize appropriately if they need to pick up utensils, other types of food that they have stored at the commissary, doing so. But if we are talking about asking, for example, a restaurant that is interested in supporting their local sidewalk food vendor, and they want to provide them with the commissary space to prepare food, to store food, but they don't necessarily have the footprint to store a cart, we can fix that by allowing the mobile food facility operator to store it at home, to bring it in the morning, to collect the items that they need, to sanitize the cart as needed, and then go out to work. So those are some of the situations that are scenarios that we're thinking about.
So, you know, the thought was running through my mind a lot, and this is for Scott and for you, Katie, that are you thinking that we need to legitimize what's actually happening in the real world, or that there needs to be some changes to what's happening to bring kind of to get the sidewalk vendors to step up their game, or is this a little bit of both?
Do you want me to start off with that, Katie? I mean,
Go for it,
I think our thought is that it's a little bit of both. I think that, you know, one of the takeaway from looking just at the way that the process works now is that it erects so many barriers that make it inaccessible for vendors who do really want to comply, but just don't have the capacity or financial wherewithal to actually do this. And so making modifications to the state law and to the county regulations to make the process more accessible, I think will then allow vendors to step into it in a way that they're motivated to do, but just find daunting based on the logistical difficulties, the financial burdens that they have to incur in order to do so. And so, yeah, I think working together as a team, as a community, in order to make this a reality will require both parties to make adjustments. But I think the will is there within the vending community, as long as the process makes sense and adapted to really support and promote what they want to do, which is to sell safe and healthy food.
So, but right now, this sector operates out of their homes, right? I mean, practically speaking.
It definitely varies. In our report, we do interview an individual vendor who actually works with a butcher shop. And so he buys his meat from the butcher shop, and they allow him to do some of the preparation in their commercial kitchen space. And so there are many vendors who have sort of informal arrangements like this with certain facilities. But yes, some vendors do prepare their food at home.
Okay. That's very creative. That's good to hear, actually. A few more questions. With eliminating penalties, what would push a vendor to go through the legalized approval process? Wouldn't there be vendors continuing to operate without permits because there's no penalty for continuing to do so? What's your thoughts on that?
I don't know if the professor wants to jump in first or.
I'll let you start off and then I'll chime in.
Okay, yeah, of course. This is a question that we commonly get, and it is our experience that many vendors are looking to be respected as legitimate businesses. They currently and have been for many decades operating informally, which has made them targets for violence, both from law enforcement agents, but also from the public. And for those individuals who don't see them as legitimate businesses and attempt to rob them, attempt to run them off the sidewalk, et cetera, despite the fact that the state law and local laws have changed over the past few years. And so even right now, we are helping hundreds of vendors go through the food certification process, getting their food manager certification, getting their state business license, getting their local business licenses, even though they know that they're unable to access the health permitting system. And so it's our experience that many vendors are just interested in operating a legal business and are willing to invest in their business if they have the opportunity to do so.
Great. Scott, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Katie said it very well. I think the motivation and the will to operate within the formal economy and to have that legitimacy of being able to say that you're a fully qualified and legal business is there, and so I think that motivation should be supported and in a collaborative way in order to just make that dream a reality. And the kind of punitive side of it, hasn't been effective up to this point. And I think the more collaborative approach would really go a long way from what we've seen in terms of really turning the corner and providing entry points for vendors into this legal community.
Okay. Scott, I think this is a question for you. Cal Code preempts local governments from adopting local ordinances in almost all cases in order to promote consistency. That's, one of the biggest rubs that we've had over the years in counties is, being played against one against the other. They allow me this right next door in this other county, and I can't do it in your county. And so the goals of Cal Code have been very noble in promoting consistency. But much of what is being asked for is for greater local discretion, which could lead to inconsistency. So do you have any ideas on how that might be constructed in such a way to kind of avoid the future inconsistency issue?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think one of the things that we really try to do in the report is thread that very difficult needle and to propose changes like the ones we discussed during this conversation that would create a certain level of standardization across jurisdictions in order to open up the system to legal vending in a way that would be effective, but also recognize that different local jurisdictions have different experiences with the vending community, and the community has different needs that should be addressed in a flexible and innovative manner. And so it's a difficult balancing act, but what we believe is that by setting the basic framework at the state level, as we're proposing within the recommendations of the report, it will create enough standardization that will provide a platform that will then allow for the kinds of adaptation to really support robust sidewalk food vending in a way that meets the needs of vendors and the surrounding communities in a really contextual and local way.
Great. I heard you mention land use a little while ago, and I'm wondering, do you envision some possible CEQA exemption, or, so that you don't get caught up in local land use rules where, sidewalks are not designated to host street vending, in most land use zoning ordinances. And so it's possible you could solve the public health side of the issue, but not solve the land use issue and still get nowhere. So, how do you envision addressing that as opposed to jurisdiction by jurisdiction?
Absolutely. So first, I'll just go back and say again that we're talking about kind of reforming and welcoming into the formal economy an entire sector that has been informal for many decades. And so that's going to require not just amendments to the retail food code, it's going to be amendments to various land use laws, et cetera. So in terms of land use, we have not explored amendments to CEQA, whether exemptions or streamlining at the moment, because we really want the local health departments to explore the other options that may be in their community to permit these alternative commissary spaces that may open up. I will say in LA County, we are having conversations with both the city of LA and the county board to discuss how do we catalyze creation of more commissaries, just traditional commissaries, but then also thinking about the restaurants and the community centers. So that's definitely conversations that we're having with the officials that govern land use law.
That's great. One of the suggestions I might offer is that every city and county is required to have an environmental justice element, when they amend their general plan after 2020. So this is something that could be, you could come up with some standard language that you would recommend each jurisdiction include in their environmental justice element of their general plan. So just a thought.
A great recommendation.
A few more questions. Gosh, people are engaged with your presentations here. One question is regarding cut melon, because I think on one hand, people think that cutting fruits is no big deal. But regarding cut melon, commercial grade refrigeration is required by California Retail Food Code because it is defined as potentially hazardous food, and not using ice to keep the cut melon cold. You have an idea about how to address this concern?
Yeah, and we would love to hear from you all about what makes sense, because right now, the way that limited food preparation is defined is that it does not allow cutting of anything unless it's on a heated surface. And so our question for you all is, how do we allow the cutting of some produce, but maybe not all produce, or cutting of some produce in one manner, but requiring the cutting of other produce like melon to be done in a different fashion? And so we didn't have specific recommendations on that because we really wanted to hear from you all as the food experts on that issue.
Okay, so some good collaboration ahead of us. Have you and your team gone out into the field with local health inspectors to experience firsthand the wide variety of health and safety issues that come from these unpermitted vendors?
I will say that I have not been on a ride along with a health inspector, though I have spent a lot of days out in the field in the city of LA in various areas, and have had some conversations with LADPH about what they're seeing. But I think that is another great future point of collaboration.
There's a lot of willingness, I know, to do that kind of collaboration in this profession. So I think you have an extended offer through Justin and Cheryl. They can set you up if you need any assistance with that.
Great.
And Lisa also. Another good question is, we find many of the unpermitted vendors are undocumented, and even if we try to offer a path, they're fearful of being part of a legal process. How do you get those afraid to participate to comply, even if standards are relaxed to some extent?
Definitely. So many of the vendors that we work with in LA are undocumented, and we have to acknowledge that there is a very real fear of government, especially government officials that may show up with armed law enforcement who may or may not also bring immigration consequences with that interaction. And so the way that we approach it is, as nonprofits and community-based organizations, we meet people where they are. We do listening sessions. We talk to folks about what they need and what their concerns are. And oftentimes we're able to overcome some of those fears by acknowledging that those fears are very real, and that talking to them about the safeguards that California has set up to protect undocumented folks in many ways, including not requiring any type of social security number on a business license, for example.
Okay, good. Gosh.
Yeah, I just would add to that you know, one of the takeaways from doing the research was the need to build trust and community between the vending community and local officials. And I think one way to do that, as Katie suggested, is to really emphasize the protections that are in place, and to recognize that this is something that undocumented immigrants are legally entitled to do, to start their own businesses and to vend. And that's something that we should all want to promote, because it really contributes to the well-being of and vitality of our communities. And so that community and trust, I think, is just a really important thing to build. And I know that we're all really excited to do that.
Great. Maybe the last question, and one of hand washing. Local agencies already have the authority to allow home commissaries, as previously mentioned, and are allowed in some counties for low-risk carts. How can these carts deal with critical hand washing issues when the vendor is handling money, cutting up fruit, et cetera?
Yes, that is a common issue that vendors face. And so typically, many vendors work in pairs. And so they have one individual who is handling the money and dealing with sort of the more commercial aspect of the vending cart, while another individual is handling the any food preparation that's happening, so that there is no cross-contamination in that space. That is something that many vendors think about and work around often.
Okay. Here's a final question, maybe final question. We periodically see fruit carts dropped off by trucks coming from out of the area. Is there an opportunity or thought on how to incorporate labor protections for vendor individuals if sidewalk carts are more widely accessible for use or sale of food in a dispersed fashion?
Absolutely. We have a lot of concerns too about various worker protections for individuals who may be operating as an employee versus as the owner of the vending cart. What I will say is that when we talk to many vendors who are employees, and I believe Merlin actually was an employee at one point before she started out on her own with her own cart, the biggest barrier for folks is the capital to get their own cart and to operate their own business. And so it is our goal to actually, again, bring down entry costs, make carts more accessible to folks so that individuals can make the choice to become a business owner, as opposed to an employee who has to rely on, carts owned by somebody who may not be from their community.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't think we need to do the poll questions. Do you, Katie?
I think we're out of time, so I appreciate everybody's time.
All right. Awesome presentation. Lots to think about. And hopefully there'll be a good collaboration with us working with you going forward to figure this out. So Lisa, I'll turn it back to you to wrap us up.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to extend my appreciation to all the panelists. I think we will continue to engage in this discussion, and we look forward to working with everybody on not only making, shared kitchens successful, but also looking at some potential strategies to address some of the concerns identified. So it's not, this isn't the only conversation we're going to have. So the Food Safety Committee will continue to engage in this. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
And I also would like to thank all of the panelists. Great presentation today. I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to future collaboration on this, on both of these issues. And also would like to remind everyone to go to the CCDEH website and do your evaluations. Try not to do them early. I know we're all trying to multitask, but it puts a question in our minds if you're actually participating, if you do the evaluation before the presentation's even halfway over. With that, I'd say thank you and bye, everyone.